So talking a little bit about our field or sort of interdisciplinary field that we're in here. Well, first of all, we're not making it up. That's what I found out. So this is there is this thing called Google Ngram, which is sort of a frequency of mentioning certain terms in English language body of books, mostly. And you can see that there was, this is 95 to 22, there was almost nothing before, and then all of these terms will appear. There you can play with it yourself, it's fun. Any kind of term you can look at. There was no pedagogy of relation in 1800s, in case you're wondering, but then in around 2000s there was like a spike there. So it's a very kind of, and Luis to say that I was the founding father of the field, that's not true. We just want to make sure there are a lot of people that do it. They're not all members of this organization, but it's the interest towards relational education is rising kind of naturally on its own, and it will be interesting to know why. So, and this is a Google Scholar site searches, and I kind of broke them by decades, right? Relational pedagogy from 31 to 2,500 citations, all right, and then pedagogy of relation from 3, and we know all those people, to 98, and make sure that you see that the last bottom line is not a decade yet. We're only 4 years into decades, 5 years, and half of it. So it's expected to double. And that's basically what we found, that there is increased interest. And I think it's kind of, it's a very superficial overview, but why is that? I think one of them is that there was this phenomenon that some of you called neoliberal education. I don't particularly like that term, but I think here Gert Biesta called it managerial accountability. That's probably a better term for it. So, and it's a reaction to it. And I have to say that many of us in the educational field critique that thing. But critiquing doesn't get you too far. So I think it's a search for alternatives, and that's what we're doing here. And the reforms are, you know, over 40 years old now, and people don't really publicize that, but they didn't produce much of a result. There was no, they were expecting when they started it, like in mid-80s, you know, the nation at risk and all of that. When they started it, they expected a huge bump in academic achievement. It just did not happen. Nobody can show it anyway. There might be some modest gains attributed to the reforms, but nowhere near to what people were expecting. So, and there is like a very curious pause, like in the US, maybe it's a bad example, but in Europe, in European capitals, all its ministers of education who were just a decade ago were so gung-ho about going to, you know, tests, measurability, accountability, are kind of not sure what to do anymore because that didn't work. But there is also, I want to say that, you know, I'm not a historian of education, and this is very amateurist list of, but there were some also practical traditions in many countries that kind of were in the tradition of relational pedagogy. Nobody maybe called them that, or nobody thought that they were the same, but there are many different practical traditions that oriented. So, and they are not forgotten. They still exist. Many of these people in different forms still work. And there was, of course, theoretical roots, you know, Buber and Bakhtin, one of the maybe roots of it. And Noddings is kind of followers of Buber, pedagogy of care. And Mel Noddings, who passed away relatively recently, did not, her book was called Care, the Feminine Approach to Education, I think. Now, in the last edition of her book, she renamed it, actually, if you can look it up. It's called The Relational Approach to Education. So I guess she was very supportive. She wrote like an introduction to our collected, edited volume, No Education Without Relation, if you saw it. So, and I guess she also realized, well, this is larger than just the feminist thought, but feminist thought is clearly one of the major contributors to that. I also don't want to forget there was also in psychology there is counseling and group dynamics theory, and all counselors or psychologists, school psychologists, practicing psychologists are taught to build relations, explicitly taught, which is not to say that teachers are trained to do the same thing. So, and I have to like go straight to we have a problem in this field. I just want to make sure you all understand. We do have a problem. It's not us. It's the field itself. And many people identified in different ways, and Anne-Louise was one of them also. It's, so it's kind of the notion of relation is very elusive. It cannot be described in behavior. So if you reduce it to behavior, you kind of lose the whole notion. So, and also, there is this problem that relationships, like the way we evolved as biological beings, is that we have a sort of unconscious mind, subconscious mind, and also conscious mind. So the relationship management was kind of pushed down evolutionary into subconsciousness. So we do a lot of things intuitively. We read people's expression. We have this neurons that are mirroring other people. So a lot of it, not everything, but a lot of it goes subconscious. And that's why we have such difficulty to really explaining what do you mean by that, or telling people what to do, just because that's how it is. And then, even though it's sort of invisible, it is at the same time it's foundational to what we do. So making this invisible visible is the hardest task, theoretical and practical. And that's, unless we kind of fight that or face that challenge, we can't succeed, because we can't endlessly keep talking about relationship in general. We have to show some ways of doing that to people. So, and that's existential challenge, that existential problem. I think we all in this room, most of us understand that. Have we solved it yet? I don't think so. We got some work to do. So, relations are not tools. It's sort of, I think what Buber's contribution was, it's an ontological kind of thing. So it's a way of being, a kind of a mode of existence. You relate. It's not a method. You can't really. It's an ontological event, or it's sort of a flipping yourself into certain kind of different kind of being. And the implication is that we cannot really fix education by telling people what to do. So, unfortunately, I mean, it would be nice if we could, but we can't. So yeah, this is, in ontology is like a big word. People don't understand and don't want it. So I'm not encouraging any of you to use it, but with practitioners especially, but just I want to say that it's kind of a mind shift that people need to experience. And we're not, we're not gurus or preachers or spiritual leaders, so it's hard for us to ask for metanoia or overturn of brains. So, I'm kind of moving towards the solutions. The one is that we are working on already, but I just want us to be more conscious about on the language. We're developing a theoretical and practical language that would describe relations. So we have a lot of, actually, if you go through this conference, you have a lot of examples where people say, okay, this is what we do and this is how it works or doesn't work. But we don't have like a shared conceptual language yet. Sort of a professional vocabulary. Like if you go to, I don't know, psychology, you read the DSM or something like that, you will see that there is actually a group of words that they all understand. And the reason they do it, the reason we develop this conceptual concepts rather than just words, if they're more economical, you can describe things quicker. I don't know, if you say transference, a psychologist will understand what you mean. You don't have to explain how that works, how a client will see a therapist as his or her father or something like that, right? So you say transference, and that collapses the meaning, so you can actually have deeper discussions with fewer words. And we just don't have it yet, and I think we should work on it. And when and it'll probably take us some time, couple of decades or more to actually come up with language. We cannot legislate it. There is no way for us to vote, okay, let's use this terminology. The terminology kind of comes and people either pick it up or they don't. So, but I think it's important to kind of flood the marketplace with suggestions like, okay, let's go this way. For example, intentional versus relational education and the keynote address is like, that's the terms you can use. So, and I'll just give you some examples, right? And please don't think that I'm pushing any of these terms, but I'm just saying that the good concept is kind of metaphorical at the same time. It could be intuitively understood. Like, for example, the founding story. Like if you have a group of people, a community that you're building, a classroom or school or something like that, sometimes there is this event that kind of shapes it, like the we would call it original, whatever, relational incident. So, like the larger society, small groups also have founding story. We started with that, right? So it's not a bad concept for relational pedagogy to know. Like if you, a new teacher in a school, you tell them, look, you have to, here's your class of kids, you have to create a founding story. And then they say, what do you mean? Well, and then something must happen to you. You know, take them to field trip at the beginning of school year or something like that. And then orchestrate a disaster of some sort. I don't know. But usually there's kind of something happens that the community clicks together. Or, you know, for analysis. So we don't really teach teachers how to do relational analysis. So you walk into a classroom. What are you finding there? Like, how do you describe the status of relationship? One of them I just made up was like defensive clustering. It's like when kids are in clusters and they really, each of them are like cliques, they're defensive, they don't want you to come in, they want to protect their terms. So if we had a kind of a variety of this description, you can say, well, okay, here's the classroom you get. So we don't assume that every classroom, every community is the same, because they aren't. There's a huge difference for, you know, between teaching in, say, I don't know, a private elite school and teaching in an inner city school in the United States, for example. This is just different kinds of communities. You can expect different kind of relationships. Some of them are shaped by larger forces, like there is sometimes racial conflict, there are expectations, there is a sense of oppression, but they're also by microforces. So that's relational analysis. So we need to give some tools to teachers and other educators to kind of put their, you know, okay, this group is in this category. Belonging deficit is like the belonging deficit, the kids, very few of them seem to feel inclusions, feel included or belong into the community. Yeah, so anyway, you know, again, I'm not selling any of these terms. I haven't written anything about them. So, but what my message is that I think that's what we should try to work on. Every time you do a practical kind of analysis of practice, maybe think about, well, can you introduce some concept that would kind of collapse what you found into a shorter term? So once we have enough of them, then we become a lot more convincing collectively. So we can say, that's what you can do. The last one, I kind of like it. Again, I didn't expand any of them, but there's comfort fixation. It's when you care about kids' comfort too much, when you don't push them. So, right, so, and that sort of defines educational relations. We're not about comfort only, right? We're about well-being, but not for the sake of well-being. You have to create well-being to actually push or pull somewhere. It's developmental, it's not just comfort. And there are some educators that are fixated on well-being, and then they wonder why nothing is happening. Well, because you're a teacher, you're not their friend, and you're not their family, you're not their mother, you're not. So, again, samples. I think if we had like a few dozen of these terms, and then we could kind of exchange them and have a discussion on them, that would make us a lot more, collectively, a lot more convincing to outside audiences. So it's also time for us to maybe work on policy framework. And I know a lot of you, and me included, spend a lot of time criticizing all these bureaucrats and ministries of education around the world, OECD, on all of them. The truth is we didn't really offer them an alternative. You know, just imagine yourself in your country, you're a minister of education, and you have audience with them. And so you come and you know, complain about neoliberal reforms. Well, they ask you, okay, what do you want me to do? And then you say, what? And you say, what exactly? They think in terms of policy. They don't think in terms of classroom practices. What can I do from my chair that make me look good, you know, that I can sell to my electorate and look sort of, and make a career for myself. So that's what they want. That's how they think. Their levers of power are different than ours, and we need to offer them something. So yeah, and I think, you know, we should probably try to collectively, maybe in small groups, work on this policy framework. And I was trying to brainstorm, like, what kind of things would be in it? And it's a good question. Like, if you had all this power over a nation's education, what would you do? What kind of policies would you put in place? Like, for example, in many countries, there is a gap between school and after school, between school and extracurricular activities. Different people do it. Well, that's bad, because if it's the same person who does both, I don't know, football coaching and also teaching algebra, those people have a lot more relational capital because they can relate to kids in many ways, right? But the schools, in some countries it works fine, in others it doesn't. It's because it's different people. You cannot carry your relational capital from extracurricular, something the kids love to do, into the school academics where they have to do it. Right, so, but you can do it, right? So it's the way that your labor is arranged, the way you pay your teachers, the way you organize you can create a whole system of after-school activities like California did, for example. And then they're disconnected. They're in the same building, but that's about all the connection there is. That's a bad policy. If you understand relationality, you will probably create schools where rich experiences are possible, where kids can relate to their teachers outside of curriculum. Now, the curriculum also, there's implications of curriculum. The curriculum as built is like things you need to cover. It's not the stages of development of your classroom community that you have to go through, right? But, you know, maybe at the beginning of school year, every school should have some sort of, we actually tend to put experiential, like field trips, experiences later in the year. But relationally speaking, they should be the first, because that's how you build the bond, right? That's a curricular issue. You know, there was some school in the US, I forgot. They had like, I think, a 6th grade camp in the first week of classes, right? I mean, that's a sensible approach to curriculum, right? Because it does help you to create a community. There might be some other revisions I just don't know. Maybe, where's Anthony? The way you assess kids could also be relational, maybe some other things. There's also, of course, funding. There's always money. Like, it's actually difficult to convince policymakers to fund non-academic extracurricular things. And of course, again, we're talking in general. In some countries, people kind of do understand that thing. But the non-academic side of schooling, we need it. We can never explain why. Oh, it's enrichment. What do you mean by enrichment? Is it going to increase our GDP in our country? No, but it allows us to actually teach better. So I think that the funding streams has to be also consolidated and have that relational streak in mind. But there's also the one that I already talked about in previous conferences. We do need to learn to evaluate. Like, how do you know if the relational scope, relational landscape in the school is good? Like, what is it? We don't have good measures, and I think we should have. And some people have this attitude against all measurement, and I really find it a little bit naive. We're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars and euros on education. You know, average in OECD countries about 5.1% of national GDP spent on education, and it varies from 3 to like 9% in Iceland. But U.S. OECD sort of average to about 5%. Again, 5% of GDP is huge money. There is no world in which somebody would give us money and say, do whatever you want with it, right? No, we have to really show them that actually works. If we claim that relationship or relational capital is important, then they'll ask us, how do you know that? Well, because my school is wonderful. We're not talking about your school, we're talking about all schools. How do we measure, how do we know? There were some attempts, kind of feeble attempts in different countries to measure the reality of well-being. Usually it's surveys, they're not really that great. Bullying numbers, not really that great. A self-report actually doesn't work for accountability, as you know. In policy circles, if you say, oh, we're going to survey schools. No, it's not that reliable. People always, if you start evaluating on something, people learn to to play that game. They will exaggerate, they will manipulate the data, they will do something. So we have to come up with some sort of more objective way of determining how is the school on the relational scale. In addition to academic, nobody's going to give up tests for academic subjects. I mean, we can improve them, but then we cannot really get rid of them. It's just a political issue. So anyway, I think policy framework like that, I don't know if we know enough to write it, but at least I think we should maybe try, just to see if we have enough collective wisdom to do that. And then finally, so the third thing I think what we should do is educator preparation. So it's not a secret that we don't teach teachers how to practice relational pedagogy. We just don't. And there are many actually examples throughout this conference where it could be done. Like for example, I think UK was one of the first from developed nations that really took mindfulness practices seriously. They have very robust data to show that that works for children. I don't know if they measure it for teachers or not, but it will probably work as well. We need to tell teachers, future teachers, that look, your mind, yourself is the main instrument you're going to be using, and you have to know that instrument. You have to keep it in good shape. You have to tune it, and you have to know how it works. So that self-awareness really is the one that that makes relational pedagogy possible. And we know it because of the mentioned counselor and school psychologist tradition. You cannot be a psychiatrist or psychotherapist before you undergo treatment yourself, right? You have to have in good shape yourself, more or less in good shape. So, and we don't do any of that. Teachers are not prepared. There's no classes for that. Some people might have a yoga or something, but that's about it. So there is also no classes on relationship dynamics, on group dynamics. So teachers walk into a classroom completely blind. They don't know, they don't have the language to explain what's going on. Why is everybody hating me? Or why these kids are liking me and those hating me? Why do they like each other? Why do they hate each other? So none of that they understand or have any kind of tools to analyze. And also we, like in business training, they use a lot of cases. And actually in management, public management and business management, they don't have a theory. So it's a little secret that they don't like to share. But they have developed this case analysis. They always have a case, and then analyzing the cases helps them to actually kind of develop a way of thinking the managers think. So we should also build something like that. So because the relational scenarios are very complex, like I said, half visible, half invisible, so we need to give educators a little bit of an X-ray vision to see what's going on relationally. And then of course, yeah, there was the group learning has been, I think, in vogue since 1960s. They could never show like big academic achievement that was gained from that. But because they didn't measure the relational impact. Of course, if you have a project-based kind of dual and progressive education, it may not affect the test scores that much. But it does affect the relationships in classroom. And if you keep not measuring that, you think it's useless because of whatever they don't do well in math as you expected. But again, if we learn to measure it, we can say, use this because it helps you with relationships. Even if you miss something in curriculum, even if scores go down, it's really not the end of the world. And this is a very hard message to sell, and I think we should start selling it, because we have some other goals for education. Okay, so I'm kind of wrapping it up, but basically, okay, the field was born, right? Whatever it is, whatever that means, people use this vocabulary. Now we kind of have to shape it, and shape it from the point of view of impact on practices, a larger impact on practices. And again, I'm just listing again main points. And the last point I didn't cover, but I think what many of you do is empirical research on relational education is absolutely necessary, because we do need to prove that this stuff kind of works. Not works in the old traditional sense, but that there are actually improvement in relational outcomes of education. Yeah, we need a theoretical language or conceptual language policy framework, rethinking educator preparation, and also professional development, because they're kind of always together, and do more empirical research. And the last point I want to make before we go into discussion is that this is not about brand. You know, I'm totally fine with people using other vocabulary. There is a lot of kind of related fields that are close to us, not close to us. There's dialogic education, there is well-being, social emotional development people. So so let's not, you know, I was joking about the sect, let's not be a sect, right? So we're not to impose our little brand on everything. That's really not the point. The point is, like, actually, I think we're more of an umbrella field, so which means that you can come in and maintain your identity as outdoors educator, as, I don't know, early childhood educator, so you don't have to give up anything to become part of us. As long as you agree on the basic premise that, you know, human relations are kind of important for education, should be able to come in. So let's not be jealous about other groups.